to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brand John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
And today's date for the BJ Show is May 21st. Is that right, John? Did I get the right date?
You're exactly right.
May 21st, 2025. This is the A block, which means we start just a little bit after the top of the hour. And for you young folks, that means a little bit after 7 o'clock. We talked about the top of the hour and quarter hour, which is sort of a non-event anymore because people don't look at clock faces anymore, so it doesn't make any sense if you look at top and bottom of the hour, stuff like that. That is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. I spell his name because you need to enter that properly into your computer, onto your laptop, onto your tablet, your smartphone, whatever. JOHNCOMBEST.com. That's the site that gets you all the information. John works on this site every single day, has done it for 23 years. He puts out tons of information, lots of different links. Nothing fancy. We would call it Web
0.0.
And John is not afraid of touting the fact that it's very basic, but it gets the job done, right? Who needs all the fancy schmancy stuff, right, John?
Boy, you've promised that to a lot of girls up off of Newhalls Ferry Road, right, Brad? It's not fancy, but it gets the job done.
That's right. Same thing like the traffic calming islands on Newhalls Ferry.
The bump outs.
Right, the bump outs, whatever they call them. Anyway, what we do is we start the show with this guy. Your name, sir?
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what's your job?
Now on with the countdown.
And we give you the top three. And we start with?
In third place.
You know, Brad, a lot of cliches about politics. Politics is the art of the possible. Politics is a relationship game. We saw some of that yesterday on display at TWMP Daily. That's right. That's the daily show put together by Scott Fawn and Jake Crozen. During legislative session, they get together not just on Sundays for This Week in Missouri Politics, but a few times during the week to do midweek updates. Used to be known as This Week in Missouri Politics Midweek Update. They had the man at the center of a big controversy last week. They had him on the show yesterday. His name is Doug Beck, and he's a state senator that represents South St. Louis County. He's the leader of Democrats in the Missouri Senate. They are a minority in the Senate, Brad, but they still have filibuster power. They can still filibuster on the floor of the Senate and try to make changes to what they consider to be bad bills. You and I discussed last week, Brad, that the legislature adjourned early last week because Senate Republicans pulled off a legislative maneuver known as PQ, or moving the previous question. And it's a way to shut off debate, to end a Democrat filibuster, and say, negotiating time is done. We will no longer negotiate with you. We are going to push through this legislation. Filibusters be damned. And it's known for damaging relationships in the legislature. Missouri's pretty unique in that we have a PQ rule and we generally don't use it. So that's kind of a unique feature of the Missouri Senate. I'll cut to the chase, Brad. Scott and Jake had Doug Beck on yesterday to talk about the legislative session and, also talk about this Royals and Chiefs Stadium session. And the frustration in Doug Beck's voice was prominent. It was evident. It was palpable when you listen to him, Brad. In short, what happened the last week of the legislature, in which Republicans passed pro-life legislation and passed anti-sick leave legislation on the last day of the Missouri Senate, damaged relationships with Democrats to the point where when Governor Kehoe calls the legislature back, likely next month, I would expect to see Doug Beck and his friends in the Senate begin the session with a filibuster for certain. Now, whether or not they eventually throw in the towel and cede the floor to Republicans remains to be seen. Whether or not Republicans do another legislative maneuver and cut off debate once again to rub the Democrats' face in it, we'll see. But Brad, this goes to show that what happens one week in the legislature with relationships will affect what happens in a special session. And in fact, one anecdote I would point folks to, Doug Beck gave specific example. He didn't name the senator, but someone that Doug Beck did a favor for, a Republican he did a favor for, that expressed his extreme and sincere gratitude to Doug Beck, came back, days later, and voted for a PQ on abortion, voted for a PQ on sick leave. And Doug has had it, and he's pissed off, Brad, to be blunt. And I think we're going to see Democrats stop a lot of stuff in the special session.
Okay, John, you're the expert in this. I still don't totally understand this, and maybe there are listeners as well that don't as well, too. I know a lot of your political insiders know exactly what the PQ, the previous question, is. So in other words, is that sort of like a rewind feature where if they get into a filibuster mode, the opposing people can go, hey, we're going to go back to talk about what we talked about before. Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's essentially what it is. It says the time for, because in many legislatures, Brad, a simple vote will end a filibuster. And you say, okay, in this case, Democrats, you've had your time. We're going to shut off debate right now. In Missouri, I think it's fair to say, being as neutral as possible, that it's considered unstatesmanlike to move the previous question. You're pretty much telling the minority party, if it was Republicans in the 90s or Democrats in the 2020s, you're essentially saying, shut up. We'll have no more of your filibuster. And it's time to move this question forward. We're going to move the previous question, which is, let's vote on abortion bill X, sick leave bill X, right to work bill X, etc.
So it's just going back one step?
It's shutting off a Democrat. In this case, it's shutting off a filibuster. It's saying that our generally lenient and statesmanlike rules of the Senate are no longer going to apply. We're going to shut off debate. We don't care what you have to say about this. We're going to vote on this anyway.
Well, doesn't that sort of negate the whole purpose of a filibuster?
It does, yeah, for sure. And again, that's one of the unique things about the Missouri Senate is that compared to a lot of other states, you just don't have people come in and say, okay, to heck with you guys. Like, we don't care. We're not, you're also saying that you don't care about any sort of a compromise here. So, Brad, let's juxtapose this quickly with an example of a utility bill that got passed through the House, the Senate, and signed by Governor Kehoe. In that, you had a filibuster, you had a Democrat filibuster, largely Democrat filibuster, in which the debate went on for a long period of time, and you had Democrats getting concessions from the Republican majority about what would be in that bill. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
If Republicans had right away moved the previous question, if they had PQ'd the utility bill, Democrats wouldn't have got any compromise. It probably would have the bill might have failed, but it probably would have passed and Democrats wouldn't have gotten anything.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
by not using the PQ, you give the minority party, again, Republicans in the 1990s, Democrats in the 2020s, a chance to make a bill a little bit better from their perspective, a little bit more palatable. Now, Brad, there's plenty of people who are very vocal online who say that we should, if you're in the majority, you ram through whatever you want to ram through. And you could pick whatever topic it is, abortion, sick leave, whatever, and you call it out and say, hey, look, this issue is so important that to heck with the minority, we have the votes, we're going to do this.
Okay, let me give you an example. And I know we're talking apples and oranges, but I just got to sort of get this straight in my head. Last month or the month before, on the national scene in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, Cory Booker did this thing where he filibustered for like 26 hours. He gave the speech for 26 hours. If this would have been the Missouri Senate, somebody could have just said, hey, previous question, he would have been done?
Yeah, you would have to have, excuse me, you would have to have a certain amount of Republican senators. So I don't know what proportionally it would be in the U.S. Senate, but you would have to have them sign a letter that says, okay, we are going to move the previous question. And then they would vote to move the previous question.
And then he would be done.
Correct. You're absolutely right.
Interesting. Okay. Number two.
Up a notch to number 2.
My second favorite morning show, besides the show hosted by Brad Hildebrand, the morning crew with Dan and Drew on Real Talk 93.3. You can hear them in St. Louis on 93.3. You can hear them all around the state, Brad. They have fantastic coverage. Steelville, Rolla, St. James, all these areas around Missouri. Real Talk 93.3, hosted by Drew Shelton and your old buddy, Dan Strauss.
Great guy.
They had a friend of their show, State Representative Holly Jones from the Eureka area on. Brad, you'll remember we talked about her at the beginning of the legislative session because she broke with some Freedom Caucus members like Justin Sparks because she did not support Justin Sparks running for speaker. And those comments, Brad, which we highlighted on our show, generated a whole lot of controversy. The interview she did about Justin Sparks and John Patterson. Well, she's back on the morning crew with Dan and Drew. She was back on yesterday, and she had plenty to say about the legislative session. She talked about the fact of why Governor Mike Kehoe is better than Governor Mike Parson, even though she doesn't support, according to her, any of Governor Kehoe's top priorities. She talked about why she's against the stadium bill. She doesn't want to give money away to billionaire companies, Brad. And perhaps more importantly, she was asked how many conservatives are in the Missouri House. You know, there's 163 state rep districts. Holly Jones says that there are 10, count them, 10 real conservatives in the Missouri House. And in the Senate, she said, her direct quote is, there are maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 conservatives in the Missouri Senate. So, Brad, she's really saying, hey, there's hardly any conservatives in the legislature. She's one of the only ones. She also pointed out that she has sponsored or been an integral part, I should say, of the Born Alive bill. On the federal level, it's sponsored by Ann Wagner. And in Missouri, she says she is very instrumental in coming up with the final pro-life legislation that'll be on the 2026 ballot. She has some bangers to quote. She says Democrats, quote, hate babies and they hate life. That's a pretty good quote. She also says the Democrats hate the Constitution. Anyway, every comment that's relevant from Holly Jones is up on my website today, Brad, and I have a timestamp for it. And I don't want anybody to think that Holly was just being negative and critical. She gave the legislature a C or a quote, maybe C plus grade for the session. But she also praised her Democratic colleagues. You know, there's been a lot of folks in North St. Louis County and in North City that have been working on storm relief. She specifically praised State Representatives Kimberly Ann Collins, Lakeisha Bosley, for doing so much for their communities, for being a key part of storm response. So it wasn't, I don't want to give anybody the impression that Holly Jones was just negative in this interview, because she wasn't.
So is she just sort of stating the fact that there should be purity tests and most of the people would fail?
You know, I don't know if she would. I don't know where she is on county central committees giving a stamp of approval for candidates or not. I think that her point, when you listen to her say this, and I do have the timestamp up here, she says she was quite disappointed when she went to Jefferson City and thought that her brothers and sisters in arms, she would be fighting and standing shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of conservatives. And Representative Jones points out that Republicans in Jeff City run the gamut from kind of centrist, the word she uses, centrist Republicans, all the way to, you know, right-wing Republicans. But in her mind, she says there's only 10 members of the Missouri House that are true conservatives.
So she is not on board with the stadium bills in Kansas City then, correct?
You're exactly right. So she says no matter what comes out of the special session, she's not going to vote. She said she's an automatic no against the stadium proposals from Governor Kehoe.
Well, John, you and I have talked about this, and maybe it's because I'm not a sports fan. When you really think about it, it is stupid, because it's not like the NFL owners are, you know, on the ramp from I-70 on the 94 in St. Charles with a sign saying, you know, I'll work for food. You know what I'm saying? These dudes are millionaires many times over. Some of them, quite a few of them, are billionaires. Same thing with the Cardinals. And like it got my ire up when, what was it, 6 or 7 months ago, when the Cardinals came out and say, oh, our stadium's 20 years old. We need to make some improvements, and we don't have the money. We need the state to help us. I'm going, BS, BS, BS. Because, see, once again, John, put women in charge, and the Cardinals would, like, let's say if it was, what's Mike Keogh's wife's name? Did you say Claudia?
Claudia.
Okay, Claudia Kehoe is the governor, okay? And all the dudes that are in the Senate and House, their wives are now the senators and the House members, and the women who are already senators and House members. So it's all women, okay? And the guys from Kansas City, the Chiefs owners come in and say, oh, we need a new stadium. And the Royals people come in and say, oh, we need a new stadium. And the women would say, hey, I think Kansas is willing to give you some money. Good luck over there. Don't you think that would be the case?
I think you're gender stereotyping that men are sports fans and women are not.
Right. And don't you think that would be the case?
I don't know if that's true. Holly pointed out that she's a big Chiefs fan.
Yeah,
she just can't stomach the cost of paying for something like this.
Especially with football, you use it 8 times a year. If you throw in the pre-games 10 times a year, and if your team is one of the teams that goes and plays a home game in Saudi Arabia or something like that, you lose a home game. 7 games a year. Okay, if John Combest were going to build a new house, and he's Mr. Money Bags.
I would Airbnb it, Brad. For the interest of time, I'll point out that I would Airbnb it.
You wouldn't buy a house and live in it for 7 days, right?
I absolutely would not, Brad.
Okay, that makes sence to me. Okay, thank you,
I might
John.
get a tax credit, which is the subject of story number 1.
The number 1.
Oh, a whole lot of national coverage for our friend, Billy Long. Billy, don't you lose my number. Yeah, that's right. The New York Times, among other national publications, and closer to home, the progressive blog, the Missouri Independent. Jason Hancock has a thorough piece. Jonathan Shorman from the Kansas City Star has a detailed piece. What's the topic, Brad? IRS nominee Billy Long is before the U.S. Senate. He has to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate before he can go lead the IRS. And here's the problem. I know we're short on time, Brad, so I'll just explain this briefly. Billy Long got a number of campaign contributions from some folks that do, you could call them unique, or you could call them non-existent yet, tax breaks. Some companies like White River Energy Corporation, some other folks that are promoting tax credits have given Billy Long enough money to pay off his campaign debt from his 2022 U.S. Senate race. So in short, Brad, Billy Long carried debt from his campaign for a while. And then last year, around the time that President Trump nominated him to lead the IRS, some folks who were regulated by the IRS gave Billy Long a bunch of money. Now Billy Long has no debt. Democrats see a big problem with this. They point out that some of the tax credits that have been promoted by some of these companies, for example, the quote, tribal tax credit, might not even exist. So what they're trying to do here, Brad, is that they're trying to say Democrats on the Senate committee are trying to say that there's companies, finance companies, with some shady tax credits. They dumped a bunch of money into Billy Long, and they hope that Billy Long will get confirmed and then give these companies a whole bunch of leeway and go easy on them. I gotta say, Brad, when you read the headlines and you just skim the story, it doesn't look particularly good.
You know what? Billy Long should have just had a big auction to get rid of his campaign debt. Don't you think he should just?
I think he should have. Yeah, he could have sold some mementos.
Right.
You know, he famously, he started the whole phrase, the Trump train.
Right.
And he had
right.
President Trump, sign his tie after a State of the Union.
Right.
Now, I happen to think, jokes aside, I happen to think Billy Long is a great man, and I don't think that he would sell favors when he heads the IRS. And he was pressed on a lot of other issues of whether he would audit people that are friends of the president. Democrats are trying to make him look bad. I don't think you can question his integrity. I think the timing of the campaign donations raises a lot of questions that Democrats are going to him on.
It's going to be interesting, okay? The pendulum swings both ways. When the Repubs were on the minority side as far as the president's concerned, anyway, we won't go with that. Okay, we have to take a break.